So, all right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lynette Marrero. I am one of the co-founders of SpeedRack. Ivy Mix, my partner, is over there in her Bartlanda. So I see in our chat, we have lots of people coming in, reopening restaurants, people with event production companies and products. And today our conversation is centered around really just what we kind of find uncomfortable when we were thinking about themes and topics of this month and what we could offer in programming to the women in our SpeedRack network and beyond was things that have particularly been affecting us this year that we wanted to tackle. And as we kind of looked at all the categories, the actually financial wellness category ended up being one of the biggest ones. And we realized because there is so much trepidation about talking about money, how to access capital, how to manage your own finances, just getting started. And a lot of our community are gig workers, freelancers, and this year was particularly hard for anyone who was working in that space. So reinvention definitely was something. Everyone found a pivot. And so we thought back to this wonderful conversation we had a few years ago on our first Women's Empowerment Day. And we spoke to our amazing friend, who I'm going to pass the mic to in a moment, Samantha Katz. And we talked about the thing that terrified women, that we thought if we wanted to really change the landscape of hospitality, the way to change that is to now change the conversation about ownership and creating things in the space. And then, so she gathered a group of investors, and we had our first Invest and Imbibe, a breakfast chat, which I had never seen more bartenders show up early for breakfast to have a conversation. And it was just a really incredible open forum. So we wanted to recreate that now for everyone, some sort of conversation where we can talk about accessing capital. These are all women who we admire for their business savvy and who have so much to offer in this space. So I'm going to pass it off to Samantha Katz.
Thanks, Lynette, and thanks, Ivy. Super excited to be here in a COVID world with you. Sad to not be hugging everyone that's on this virtual chat today, because that I often say in my bio, I prefer hugs over handshakes. But I think the perfect way to start today's dialogue, and we'll keep it pretty informal, given how intimate this audience is and how awesome you all are. We'll basically go and I'll allow each of these incredible women the opportunity to tell their stories, and then we'll go through kind of their pathways to capital. And also, what's unique about them is some of them wear dual hats, as either not just as investor or entrepreneur, but as both. And sitting on both sides of the table, it's often wonderful to hear what kinds of perspectives they have. So I'll shut up and flip the mic over to Alexis, and then we'll just go alphabetically through the speakers.
Thanks so much for having me, and for Samantha for moderating. It's great to see you all, some of whom I knew before this and some of whom are new friends. My name is Alexis Beechan. I am the founder and CEO of The Drop Wine, which is a California-based alternative packaged wine company. And that's probably what got me in the room. But my background is really in traditional marketing. I started my career at different advertising agencies. Before deciding to start The Drop, I was on the agency team that ran the Dos Equis Most Interesting Man beer campaign, if we all remember that one. So that's what really got me in the world and thinking about how I could shake up wine, the way that campaign shook up the beer category. So that was really kind of the lens that I used to start my business. When I started in 2015, I could count on one hand the number of canned wine brands that were really making a national push. Within 3 years, you could probably quadruple that. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. For The Drop itself, we did some cool things. We were in 20 states. We launched in Walmart. We were in Fenway Park for a bit. We also launched our direct-to-consumer business, which in alcohol is quite interesting I'm so happy to talk about that if anyone has questions around that piece. I decided to make the drop more of a part-time thing in 2019, at the end of 2019, and joined a tech startup, much of which was because of my experience trying to get to market with an alcohol brand and the issues I ran into with trying to find the right sales team. So I joined a tech company called Hunters, which helps B2B companies make introductions and meet enterprise customers. But the drop was very much still a part of my life, probably up until the end of last year, when I decided that it was probably time to move on. Some of it was because of the pandemic. Some of it was because I wanted to buy a house, and very few people talk about the roadblocks or even part-time entrepreneurs when it comes to getting personal liquidity and finance. So also happy to chat more about that if there's questions there. So that's my background and happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you here, Alexis. Bridget, tell us your story.
Hey, Sam, thanks. That was great, Alexis. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here and be at a Speed Rock event. I've been like a little disconnected from the liquor business for a little over a year now. So it feels like I have this burst of energy to be kind of back in the room talking with a lot of you people. So I am an investor by trade, academically, and then at the beginning of my professional career, I was an investor at a hedge fund covering consumer goods companies, so publicly traded, all sorts of categories. Wound up finding a niche in global alcoholic beverages because I was bored and booze was fun to look at from an investment perspective. And I wound up being responsible for investing in public equities in the global beer, wine, and spirit space for the hedge fund for about 5 years, which led me to getting excited about the resurgence in American craft distilling. I decided that I saw an opportunity specifically within rum. I decided that I was going to build a rum distillery in Brooklyn at the end of 2011, and I left the hedge fund to go do that. Founded the distillery in 2012 and launched a rum called Oni's, which hopefully some of you know, and kind of scrapped it out, bootstrapped the whole thing with a small, awesome team, producing and sort of hand selling everything. Happy to talk about the excitement and plight of that as an independent spirits company. Came to the conclusion kind of 5 years later that in order to get really from A to Z with Oni's, I was going to need a strategic partner. I found one in Proximo and started scaling the brand nationally within their portfolio. Eventually made the decision to fully sell the brand to Proximo and left amicably with a smile at the beginning of 2020 to move on to new adventures. One of which is a consulting group. So I actually work as an outsourced CFO for a lot of pre-seed and seed stage CPG companies. So there's probably a lot to talk about. If you guys want to follow up with me after this call, happy to spend pro bono time with you. Anything from financial modeling to everything we're going to probably talk about in the next hour. That's called the Cyclone Group. And I also decided to dip my toes in the non-alc space, kind of canning a lot of what I was excited about in that kind of world, and inspired by my hometown, which is in Rockaway Beach, Queens. I launched on the last day of summer last year a canned sparkling water that's infused with adaptogens and real fruit and some powerful plants called Rockaway. It was launched digitally native, and we just started distributing through traditional retail distribution in January. TBD, it's exciting, different world, totally. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm running kind of both businesses in tandem right now, just because it's a lot of fun and it's super stimulating, and I really want to stay connected to a bunch of different types of entrepreneurs. So hopefully that didn't take up too much time. I get kind of, ranty.
That was perfect. Bridget, thank you for being here. We're going to move to Jordan and then we'll go to Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Bridget, thank you. I love knowing your story because I actually didn't know about it, and it's awesome, and congrats on Rockaway. Let's see. So my name is Jordan Salcido. I am the founder and CEO of Ramona. It's an organic Italian wine spritz or wine-based spritz. I'm drinking the blood orange right now. We have 5 different flavors at the moment. And prior to that, although I'll talk more about this in a moment, prior to that, I was the beverage director for a restaurant group called Momofuku, owned by the chef David Chang. And prior to that, was a sommelier at some other places like 11 Madison Park and Danielle. And they're basically, I sort of came up through restaurants and then always worked Harvest and started working Harvest a long time ago, like over 10 years ago at this point, and sort of fell into Harvest and fell in love with it, and started in Burgundy and then sort of continued there and ended up just sort of being able to work every year at a different great place, and noticed these through lines. And the more I studied wine, I also went the path of like the master sommelier exam path. And so I wanted to just fully immerse myself in wine. And for me, Ramona launched in 2016. Like Alexis was saying, it was like far before this sort of explosion of cans hit the market. And it was exciting and still is exciting. It's such an exciting world because there are so many cool things in alternative packaging these days. And for me, yes, the thing that I always wanted was a beverage in alternative packaging, or a beverage that was convenient for casual moments that met my value system as a sommelier. So for me, organically grown grapes were always important. I had some connections with growers in Sicily and just felt like this is sort of a no-brainer. For whatever reason, you have a place like Sicily, which has a 3,000-year viticultural history of organic farming, and also the grapes are not only delicious and very high quality, but also inexplicably incredibly reasonably priced compared to organically farmed grapes in other places, the US and whatnot. And so that was for me a reason to look to Italy for inspiration. And then we ended up actually moving all of our production there because I was able to source ingredients that I liked better, and I didn't have to add weird chemicals, which I was actually surprised to learn in the US with our test batch. We were highly encouraged to add things I'd never heard of that have to be administered with a hazmat suit, like Velcorin and or potassium sorbate, things that are either known to be not very attractive and are on the Whole Foods no-fly list, or things that I'd never heard of that are neurotoxins that don't have to be disclosed. And so anyway, that is Ramona. Ramona's named after my little sister's childhood alter ego. It was basically her 5-year-old scapegoat, and whom she would blame when she did things with conviction that were mischievous and a little bit naughty. And so for me, at the moment of founding Ramona was after we opened Momofuku Co, and it was this very serious wine program, and I was taking the MS exam, and that was sort of my life as this very focused fine wine kind of direction. And the thing I wanted to drink most of the time was just something like a Ramona that just didn't exist, and that is where it came from. And it felt like a mischievous, naughty alter ego to the rest of my life at that time, which is where the name came from. And yeah, so now we have 5 different flavors, and we have 3, we call them the citrus sisters, so blood orange, lemon, and ruby grapefruit. And then we also have a dry sparkling rosé that we launched a couple of years ago, when a friend who ran some hotels was like, please make this for us. So we did, and then it sold out. And yeah, we've raised, I guess, pursuant to this conversation, we've raised now 3 rounds of capital. We needed to raise 2 of them. And then the third one, we opened a small round for some friends who, it started off with a friend in the music industry who said, we want in, if you can let us in, do. And then we sort of had a conversation, and I've raised now enough times where I think what has been true every single time is that it always goes differently than I have expected. Whatever I expect is not what in turn manifests. And I think like my truths from this are that what I have learned, which is also true of just in general with relationships, is that we all have different relationships with money, and that needs to be respected in the process. So any investor, and for the most part, we've ranged from a couple of different firms, but primarily it's all been friends and family. And so I take that responsibility really seriously. And I am grateful for and want to respect every dollar that somebody has invested in us. And the other truth, actually, this came from a podcast that I was listening to in between. We had a prep call about a week ago and then now, and it just felt relevant to share. It's this woman who I'd never heard of until a couple days ago, and her name is the Wealth Witch, and she has a podcast, and I think it's like episode 4 or something. But she goes into this basically philosophy that the universe wants us to have what it is that we desire, and that if we are to earn the right to sort of wealth or capital or funding or whatever that means for you in the stage of your journey, what you need to do, and of course I've not put this to test yet because I just listened to this thing, but I think it is true when I think about my own experience. If you can sort of be responsible and take responsible steps with cash, whenever it is, and the universe sort of sees that you are respecting of this process or this currency, then it will give you more, because because that is energetically how the universe works. So that's like a little woo woo, but it actually resonated enough that I felt like it was worth sharing.
Totally worth sharing. And before we hop to Michelle, the longest relationship you're going to have with anyone or anything in your life is your relationship with money. It starts young. So super excited to get into that conversation. TBD. We're going to switch over to Michelle.
All right. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm based in Los Angeles along with Alexis. So we are, Alexis and I are just 2:30 here. Not quite drink time, although I guess drink time could be any time. But yeah, whatever. I mean, why not? Especially during COVID, right? You're at home. Why not? So I'm the founder of the Forward Project. It's a Los Angeles-based leadership development consultancy. And my past professional experience includes 17 years in the wine and spirits industry. I had a lot of various roles, from marketing to portfolio management to business development. So really got to understand what it was like on all sides of the business. And what I loved about that is that in each division that I went into, it became that much more useful for me to know, okay, exactly what is it that would be most helpful for the sales team when you're in the marketing side, or what do we need from the supply side in order to, work with our customer base, et cetera. So it was really very interesting, and I was very fortunate to have all these different roles. And I was lucky also enough to work in different types of companies. So everything from very small family-owned businesses all the way up to large publicly traded companies like Constellation, and also worked in Los Angeles, and Napa/San Francisco, I should say, as well as New York. And it was, I'm also a certified sommelier. I taught classes in San Francisco for a while. That was really fun. I never actually worked in a restaurant. So never had that experience like Jordan did, but really just wanted to gain the knowledge. And so I really enjoy going through the certification program. And I also worked post the wine and spirits industry. I worked in the startup world for a financial technology company here in Los Angeles. And I'm also an angel investor. So coming from a lot of different angles, and happy to answer any sort of questions based on any of those angles for you. And I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, especially with this panel. What an incredible group of women. So thank you for having me.
I'm humbled, as always, by the just awesome stories that each of you have. I think I'll take a moment just to tell mine and put this into some context as we kick off the discussion, which is, I am a social justice advocate who happens to have landed on Wall Street at the age of 19. 20 plus years ago, I had a dream that we should put a price tag on the environment in order to get corporations to care about it. And I got to be one of the first dozen or so people on Wall Street building out environmental markets. And I became the first female global managing director in the industry at the age of 30, which for women in finance, there are not many female global managing directors. And they certainly are, there are less than 5 I can count on my hand that make it there at such a young age. So I have to say it was a challenge, like an incredible challenge and a great honor. Throughout the journey, I always thought about why I made it on the path the way I did. And I discovered along the way, it's always about the people that you surround yourself with. And I always surrounded myself with incredibly diverse, talented teams on Wall Street. I don't know why, but I did it. It was always 50% diverse in terms of women and gender lens, and then racial and ethnic and age diversity. And I believe that diversity drives performance. I'm a champion of that. And the last 12 years or so has been spent really focusing on leadership. Along the way, I met my husband, Alan Katz, who happens to be just an amazing human. He co-founded the New York Distilling Company. And along that journey, in dating him, I started thinking about, where are the women in this business? Are they just behind the bar? Are they just serving me? Are they the hostess at the restaurants that I walk into and the bars that I drink at? And the answer was, there were actually a few out there making spirits and products. There were 10 at the time. I decided to go out and introduce myself, thinking I might need a support group for women who are crazy enough to marry distillers. That turned into Ladies of American Distilleries, which grew into 900 women in front of and behind the making of spirits across the country, where I had the privilege of meeting Bridget and spending so much time soundboarding on her journey, became the Women's Distillery Guild. And now it's a part of a much bigger nonprofit around women and beverage, and so glad to see it on its journey and that everybody's involved it just in supporting one another. Now I spend my time, and this is sort of secret, I know we're recording, so just don't share it, Chatham House rules for a second, but I'm in the midst of building 501c3, the first center of innovation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and finance, because the thing that matters most to me, aside from my husband and children, I have 2 girls, is access to capital. So Invest and Imbibe started 6 years ago with the idea that women need to talk about money the way men talk about money. We need to identify as investors, whether we have a 401k, whether we have a savings account. If we go out and buy products, which 85% of products are purchased by women, if we invested in the products we'd buy as we support them on their journey, holy shit, would we own the world at this point? And we don't. In fact, not only has capital for women gone down in 2020, in fact, women received 0.3% less capital in 2020 than they did in 2019. And when the area that I spend the majority of my time in is actually moving up that ladder of capital to understanding who writes the checks and how those people access capital. And it turns out only 1.3% of the institutional check writers are women and people of color. So of a $70 trillion market, only 1.3% is managed by women and people of color, even in today's world. So I'm building a center of innovation around diversity, equity, and inclusion in finance. Super happy to have this conversation and to moderate the discussion tonight. And let me say this, like this, you can ask anything you want here. I don't know what Lynette plans to do with the recording, but you will be safe. And I want you to know that no one's going to hold it against you, or you shouldn't feel awkward about asking any type of question here. I didn't know anything about investing in companies when I was in my 20s, to be honest. And it took asking a lot of questions and meeting a lot of investors along the way to understand how to build my angel portfolio, to understand how to buy stocks, to understand how to look at real estate. And I'm super thankful of not just the women on this panel, but all the people I've met along the way who've been forward and honest enough to have the conversation, because the only way we can do more is by learning from each other. So to kick off the conversation tonight, we've had this great, sampling of stories. Learning how to tell your story when you go out to raise capital is a big deal. So It's the reason why I asked the speakers to take a while here to tell you who they are. If you don't have a track record at running a company or building a company, or you're going out to access capital, you have to be able to tell your story. So that's lesson one from tonight. And we're going to go into the conversation. I think it's also important to learn some of the intimate aspects of these stories, which I'd like to go to the entrepreneurs first. We can take it in alphabetical order, jump in as you like, but each of you have gone through tremendous transition in your lives, as we all have, especially in pandemic times. Those transitions are even more stressful and complicated because they may be forced transitions for some. What are some of the hardest parts or challenges that you've faced in making those transitions to entrepreneurship? And also, what's the hardest part of launching that you faced in building your products?
I can jump in. So, I think everyone, it's such a great group of speakers, because I think we're obviously coming from, very different backgrounds. So, from my perspective, the marketing piece, how do I go to market? How do I create a brand? How do I do packaging? That was pretty easy. I wish I had Jordan's Rolodex when I was trying to find a wine producer. I actually ended up on I did a road trip with my dad through California, stopping at different wineries to try to convince them that I was bankable and that they should make me wine and not just whatever was like in the back tank. So I think your supply chain, at least, is super important. And, how Jordan was speaking, especially to how important your products are, especially as a category gets more competitive. You need not only a product that you can differentiate, but also that a supply chain you can count on as things go well and you need to scale up, or as things go badly and people go out of business. One of the hardest days for me was getting a phone call that our canning and distribution facility was going out of business as of today, and I would need to get all of 2,000 cases I just produced out of there. So, certainly for me, building out that supply chain, learning the industry, learning how to speak a very different language is something that should definitely not go ignored, even if I was much more comfortable, and I wanted to create content and kind of do the stuff you're more comfortable with. So that was definitely a huge learning experience for me.
Bridget?
I don't know if I have enough time to go through.
Pick one.
Okay, I'll just pick one. I'll start off by saying, I was starting Oni's was obviously the best decision I've had in my career, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I think you kind of have to, I won't say I had no idea, I had little idea relatively. And I think you need to have that in order to make the leap into starting your own business, because if you don't have that sort of naivete, you'll never actually do it. If you don't really have this drive and vision that you see an opportunity to kind of work towards, then you would never do it. But I was trained professionally as an investor, and I was an investor in much, much larger companies. So when I looked at the opportunity and I was out raising money, I was looking at it from a macro perspective, from a top-down perspective. If I can this is how large the market is, this is how fast it's growing, and so on and so on and so forth, and make sort of assumptions and forecasts based on that. And I was able to sell it, aka raise money from friends and family, really friends at the time, for the initial raise. The problem was, once we actually started to initially get off the ground, I was like, whoa, I was thinking about this business plan upside down. And really, it should have been thought about okay, I made a product. First of all, obviously assume 6 months. You start 6 months after, at least 6 months after you think you're going to start. And then it's I have no real on the feet relationships in the liquor business. So how many accounts do I have to visit every single day to get people to taste? And then how many times do I have to go back till I get them to buy one bottle? And then how many drinks does it take for them to go through one bottle? Oh, and by the way, I only make $6 off a bottle, and I have a 6,000 square foot warehouse that the rent comes due, you know, every month, plus the equipment that I invested in, plus my small team, so on and so forth. So I should have been thinking about it initially, the business plan that way. And that would have just helped conserve capital because my estimates and forecasts would have been more reflective of reality. So I think it can be easier to sell investors on a vision and a concept and an exciting opportunity. I think you need those macro market opportunity things in your deck or your pitch or whatever. But when you actually think about how you're going to continue to create value so that when you have to raise money again, the value of your company is at a higher price because you've actually been able to execute on all the things you thought about. So I challenge everyone to come at it being like, you can create, I think it's important to create excitement from a macro perspective, but when you're actually doing the forecast and the numbers, think about it really from a bottoms up perspective.
Can I add on to that? I think that's so well said. Like, it just resonates with my experience as well. And like, now we're thinking about another raise down the road. And I would say to anyone who is getting ready to raise capital, there's so much power in your story at the beginning because there's no data yet. And so you are selling the dream, and that is your job. And yes, we all, or at least, I mean, at Ramona, we've certainly encountered a whole bunch of road bumps, and right from production and moving to a different facility. And at one point, like, our distributor has a secret warehouse that's not refrigerated, where it turns out they were selling a lot of our, or storing a lot of our product. And then something happened to the can lining quality. And it's like, then you're in a sort of like a who has to pay for it game with the distributor that has a lot more power than you do. And so those are all things that will happen in some form or another. And I think hindsight is always 2020, but I think when you're going for that initial raise, don't be afraid to push a higher valuation, because if you believe in what you're doing, you believe in your product, and you think it has a shot, right? I guess go for what you think is fair, I guess, is maybe a better way of saying it, because in my experience, back to the sort of everyone has a different relationship with money, our very first investor was amazing and so supportive, but I would not have expected him to be our first investor. I thought that this other investment, I thought it was going to come from somewhere else. And those people are wonderful people and friends and all of that. And it was just interesting to sort of get this 25-page document. And it was like, oh, happy to give you a bridge loan for your initial canning run. No problem. Sign on the dotted line and we'll wire you the funds tonight. And then I had my lawyer look at it just to be safe. And of course, they said, no, you absolutely can't sign this document. You will devalue the company by 50% if you sign this. Absolutely do not. You have to sort of, you need to figure out a better way to get capital, or your valuation is sliced in half. And so I think that was such a good, powerful lesson. And I'm grateful for it, because money doesn't just usually come handed on a tray. It must be earned. And I think, at least for me, it was a really important lesson that, that everyone is going to look at it differently. Everyone will look at the same opportunity differently. So also finding people who believe in you is the best way to get started.
Most women run businesses will max out their credit cards, go into debt before they go out and ask for capital. Michelle, in this role of having played so many parts in the drinks world, the beverage world, and all the roles that you sat in, now I'm sitting in the seat of angel and listening to the stories of these women and the stories I'm sure you have a laundry list of them. What do you sort of see when people come to you? How do people even get to you to pitch? What kind of communities do you participate in that create access for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, great question. So I am part of 37 Angels, and I'm also, which then actually got me into a couple of other groups, because they were doing some joint investments with some other groups. So then I just sort of naturally started to float into some other groups as well. And I think what's really interesting is it's interesting hearing all their stories, because exactly what they talk about are things that, for me, sort of being on that side before in business, like those are the things that I know can be very, very difficult. So, when you're talking about like when Bridget's talking about, well, it's going to cost so much for our cost of goods. And then, on top of that, you also have to put in your sales and your budgets and your marketing budgets and all of that. And so you really got to think about, what does all this cost? We work too. And for us in the larger companies, of course, it was also the storage and everything else as well, right? Before it went to the distributors. And so you start thinking about all of those areas. And I think it's really important that anyone who's starting a business really does think about all of those areas. Like, okay, so what is that going to look like? What is that model going to look like? And what are my true costs going to look like? Because I think if that isn't something that's thought out, that's something that I look for when I'm talking to people who are interested in, obviously essentially getting financing. Also, what Alexis talked about, essentially, what is your moat? What makes you so unique? What makes you so different? I mean, there are so many brands out there, right? And, I think there was at one point, there were hundreds of thousands of new labels every single year, right? That were going through essentially to be through COLA, right? And that's the thing. It's like, so you realize, okay, you've got to have something that's really pretty different. So that's number one, right? And what is it about it? I think that excitement that they talked about, absolutely, and that Jordan talked about, that's got to be key, because you got to believe in it. If I don't think you believe in it, then I'm not gonna believe in it, right? And then I think also just the supply chain issue, that is such a big one. And Alexis also talked about this, and certainly Jordan talked about this too, because, depending on what you're using, whether it's for the bottles itself or for the alcohol itself or what have you, you want to make sure that supply chain is pretty well thought out. Because the number one thing, even just being, on the other side, when we were in the companies that I worked with, the number one frustrating thing, and Jordan can probably speak to this from the Momofuku side, is that, when you're dealing with a supplier and they love your, all of a sudden they love your product and it's selling really well at their restaurant, the last thing they want is for you to then say, oh, sorry, we don't have it. We're out of stock. Well, how long are you out of stock? I don't know. It could be a couple of weeks. And, then they've got to reformulate everything. So those supply issues are really important. And so I do ask a lot of questions about that, because I don't think, I've definitely talked to some entrepreneurs who didn't think about that, and they did run out of product. And I said, okay, well, how's that working for you? What's that reaction? And so those kinds of things are questions that I would always ask of somebody who is starting a company and looking for funding, because I think it's really important that they understand that. And of course, the different distribution avenues, as well as the state laws, incredibly important. So whether or not you know that, it's okay maybe if you don't know it, but make sure somebody on your team or you've got some sort of advisor that does know that, who can help you.
When you guys think about the pandemic and the role the pandemic plays on supply chain management, on just working relationships with where you're actually selling your product, for us, New York Distilling Company, we were primarily direct to bar and restaurants. COVID has been very interesting in having to pivot business direct to consumer. Curious from your perspectives, like what's keeping you up at night with your entrepreneurial hat on related to pandemic today?
For us, it's direct to consumer as well. I mean, we actually launched with the wrong company last February, and then quickly realized that our fear was accurate, and that there was no incentive for anyone in the rest of the sort of supply chain to incentivize Ramona, because only like any mistake only poorly reflected on us. And so we nipped that in the bud and pivoted to a different company last October is when we ended up launching. And we're already sort of onto another better plan, because when we look at our margin, it's like, all right, this is good. It allows us to do what we thought was important and to prove that it is quite relevant to be able to speak directly with our end consumer, but it's at a cost of 37% of the gross profit, which is sort of nuts. But yeah, the other piece of it is that, to your point about distribution, our 3 largest markets, New York, Texas, and California, furloughed their sales team. And so we had no one answered emails in our 3 largest markets from basically mid-March through mid-July. And then one of them had the gall to say, now we need you to actually introduce us to all of these places and open accounts for us, and also pay us to do so, like pay us a monthly sales fee to do so. So we left that distributor, and we are relaunching with like one of my favorite distributors in the universe on April 1st, Buller Wine here in New York. So I'm very excited about that. But everyone pivots differently, and the universe is very much connected. And so, right, luckily it's interesting, but our small distributors crushed it for us last year. And it was a good example for me, at least, in like sort of the lesson of the people that we want drinking Ramona are the people who love it and believe in it for the same reasons that we do. And in markets like California, for example, where we work with this really big distributor that has at least 10,000 other brands in their portfolio, the only way to get their attention is to like hope that you're part of a bigger portfolio, or to like pay out enough cash so that somebody will take you seriously. But like this sort of system of incentives is really a system of manipulation at the end of the day. And it's like, I don't want to have to manipulate people into drinking our product. I want them to want to drink it. And so that has been a really eye-opening thing, where it's like some markets are down because their teams were laid off, and other markets were up 500%. And so, and everything in between.
Yeah, I'll echo something. I'll echo Jordan's comments about profitability from a DTC perspective. When you're making canned product, I don't see how it's profitable, like excitingly profitable, to keep your price in line with what it would actually retail for on shelf. And if you're going to pass along shipping to the consumer, they're probably going to abandon the cart for the most part, because it's shocking oftentimes how much shipping cost is. So like, for example, with Rockaway, we're offering free shipping on our cans, but we make not much money off our website. It's just for branding and like to get awareness and to get exposure nationally. But to be honest, I don't have much other comments from a pandemic specific perspective, because coincidentally, my contract with Proximo and the full out sale of Onis concluded a week before lockdown, for better or worse for me. So, I was pivoting anyway. So it's been interesting. On a positive note, I will say that I think we are coming upon a true, I don't want to call it a hockey stick or something, but there is going to be a precipitous incline in consumption across the country this year, in the back half of this year. Like, I can feel it in my consulting business. I see a lot of deals, CPG, I have some angel investments. There's money being raised. There's investors looking to raise money. In my opinion, valuations are totally out of control. And I encourage a lot of my clients not to raise at certain valuations, because it's all fun and games until it's not fun and games. So
also knowing who to take on as an investor.
For sure.
Would be a good thing to talk about here too.
I've seen other companies that I've been involved in who took Series A venture at the end of 2019 and got themselves in a precarious position because retail fell off a cliff for them in the midst of the pandemic. And they went and pivoted to DTC very successfully. I have seen those venture partners try to crush them right now just to get their money back. So, I guess I could talk about it from different perspectives, but from my own personal entrepreneurial perspective, I was in the midst of transition anyway, but I would like to end on a positive note that I think we are going to see some light pretty soon.
I love that, Bridget. I want to take a pause from the panel for a second and just open the floor for questions. We have about 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions for the panelists. We obviously could sit here talking for hours, and happy to do so as long as the cocktails keep coming. But would love to open it up the floor if anybody would like to ask a specific question or get personal.
I think there's, I'll ask from this perspective. I think there's a lot of, from the bartender perspective, a lot of people want to now reach out to us to be involved in their products and get involved in there. And it's often hard for us to value like what we should ask for. So, some people will bring us in as advisors, and then, they'll either give you shares in the company, but it's all very foreign to us as personalities. And this is becoming something that I found really interesting in this time period and just prior to. So I guess from a business perspective, how are you looking at those advisors and how you're compensating them? Are like, what kind of models are good? So that way on the other side, when I'm being approached, I know what to kind of look for. That makes sense.
Is it just me? Is that Alexis trying to talk? Alexis, can you hear us?
She's frozen.
We'll take a pause. If Bridget or Jordan, if you want to answer that, that'd be great.
I'm happy to jump in. We definitely have brought on some, yeah,
right now.
Apologies.
I'm
happy to jump in.
Yeah, do that.
Alexis, go for it. And I can jump in after.
I think she might still be frozen.
Okay.
I knew technological problems were going to come. I thought it was going to be me, technology problems, but Jordan, will flip over to you. Hopefully, Alexis, we get you back.
Yeah, I think for one, we definitely have some advisors on our team, and I try to diversify my advisor team, sort of in all ways. We have men, we have women, and a lot of different viewpoints and ethnicities. And I guess for me, like when I think of, like, there are a couple of sommeliers who are advisors to us, and one of them was a fan early on, and just a really smart, innovative personality who's always sort of, who I knew that his endorsement would be a good stamp of approval. And then the other was another very famous sommelier who like loved the brand from the beginning, and like has just sort of always had a Ramona sticker on his phone, and that like has opened so many doors accidentally. Like we have our distributor in Ireland because they were like, hey, what's that sticker on your phone? Tell me about this Ramona thing. And that led to a conversation. So I guess the way I think about it is some of our advisors, and now that we're going forward with, now that the company's evolving, I try to think about them in a more structured way where it's sort of like a, hey, this is what I'm like, for example, an advisor that we're about to start working with is this amazing woman who has 40 years in the industry and understands all these facets of it that I don't. And sort of, I checked in with our lawyer and said, hey, what's appropriate? And then I offered that to her and said, does this sound right to you? This is what I'm thinking. And she said, yes, that sounds great. And so I think it, like, I mean, and that exact amount happens to be like 1/4 of a point for her, like that vests over 2 years on a monthly basis. And by the way, she's not started yet. So in the meantime, we'll sort of get a lot of bullet points that say, hey, this is what she's thinking of doing. Whereas other relationships with our sommeliers are, the two who happen to be sommeliers who are advisors and supporters, it was much more informal. And it's just sort of like I know that I can reach out to them at any point, and it's things that I'm certain they would always provide that perspective anyway. So I don't know that I'm doing it the right way, but I guess I want to never feel like, I want to feel like I'm always respecting people's insight and time. And if I know that somebody's going to add value to my company, then I want to, assuming I can, and it's a responsible thing to do, then I can compensate their expertise for that. I don't know if that's helpful.
I'll just add to that quickly. Lynette, I think it depends on how you personally feel about the brand as well. I don't know, if you feel that the brand is what the value of the shares are going to be from like a pure compensation perspective, because like if someone's going to offer you 5 points or whatever, make up the number, but the company's worth 0, then it's 0. 5% of 0 is still 0. So I think it's very like specific to each particular deal that might come across your desk. And like, I think the juxtaposition with startups is they often don't have enough cash to actually pay you, probably what you would get from a big company. I mean, definitely what you would get from a big company. So I think there isn't like an industry standard. You kind of have to massage each situation. And I would just, from a personal perspective, like personally digest how excited you are about like being a part of it for the long term versus like, here, I'm a consultant for now, and this is what my rates are.
Alexis, I think we lost you again. I know you wanted to chime in, but I think you're delayed. Not sure what happened to the internet. Lynette, the one other thing I would say on this is soundboard with us. Like, don't live in a vacuum on this conversation. Like, find people that have a sense of it and talk to them. Don't try to with us. Like, don't live in a vacuum. And then I saw, so reach out to people like that. The onus of this conversation was like, we need to talk about money. We need to talk about compensation. It's equal pay day. Like, and also from the flip side, we sort of have to push founders too to compensate advisors, especially female advisors. I'm going to call it like, we often give our time for free. And we're worth more than that. And so thoughtfully having that conversation, the onus falls on both sides of us. Women need to ask as the recipient, as the advisor or strategic partner, and we sort of need to push the founders to think of us and respect us in that way. I saw that Erica put up a question in the chat, and I want to make sure I get this right. So Women's Distillery Guild became Women of the Vine and Spirits. It's now a 20,000 member organization. There are so many different seminars and corporate sponsors. Women's Distillery Guild itself, or what was Ladies of American Distilleries, still has a Facebook group. It's super active and the community is totally supportive of one another. So definitely find it on Facebook and join, and you can learn more about like how engaged you want to be or get involved. Any other questions? What I would love to do in oh yeah, Bridget, go.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to echo, like I put some notes together before, after our prep emails, and I just wanted to echo and like emphasize what you were saying, Sam, about it was something that they emphasized in business school. And personally, I thought it was bullshit in a lot of ways, like networking. But the older I've gotten and wiser, no, but really women are out to help women, and it's real. And like, just Sam, you've really put me onto this in a lot of ways with Invest and Imbibe and so on and so forth. Like, people are willing to give their, 10 minutes of time, half an hour Zoom, whatever it is these days. So I just would encourage anybody out there who's like holding back from reaching out to people, not to do that, and not to be like intimidated or scared. There are no dumb questions, and like, what goes around comes around, and paying it forward, and people, giving you their experience, it will come back. It's good for everyone. Plus, like, even if you get higher and higher or further and further along in your like business and networking, like, people want to be connected to. If you feel like someone's too far out of reach, it's not true. Like, those people who seem too far out of reach really are disconnected from the pulse of what's going on in the market. And, their job is to stay on the pulse of what the young, inexperienced people are doing, because that's where the future of like industry is. So I just wanted to out
No,
there.
that was perfect. I was about to go to like one key, like takeaway from each of you, like one final word or minute, sort of 60 seconds. What's the one thing everybody should walk away from this conversation and just know? Maybe Alexis, I think we got you back. Let's go with you.
Hi
Start
guys,
with
I'm back. I think the LA sun problems, my computer overheated. So sad for me. My takeaway would be there are so many things that an entrepreneur has to do. We all know it's basically problem solving. The most important thing is to know your customer and carve out an hour a week to, whether it's your customer is trade or your customer is an individual, your beverage, like call them, email them personally, ask them what they think, ask them what we should do next. It is so easy to just listen to the loudest voices in the room. And if you give your customer what they want, it seems so simple, they will reward you for it. So that would be my piece.
Michelle, what one final takeaway?
I would say a few things that you can look into, just if you need additional help. So yes, totally agree with Bridget. Reach out to people. People want to help, so don't be afraid to reach out. You can also go to even your local SBDC, so Small Business Development Center. They have a lot of free help, by the way. They've got free lawyers, all kinds of things for businesses who are just starting. So I really would encourage you to find your local SBDC. It's just a great resource. And then of course there are other sort of channels, right? So Shivani has an incubator, CoLab, ZV Ventures, which is part of Anheuser-Busch, Constellation Ventures. And Constellation Ventures, I believe, also has a specific program for women founders. So, check those out, look at them. Again, there are resources out there, and there are people who want really incredibly innovative women entrepreneurs on their team, if you will. So I would say definitely do some research and then reach out to free help too.
Jordan.
Yes, I would say all of the things that have been said, and also trust your gut. I think Bridget said this, when you're getting, at least this was true for me, certainly, when you jump into something, you sort of do it because you're too naive to understand all the roadblocks. And that's a good thing. If you believe in something, go for it. There's a woman from New Jersey who's like, I've never met her, but I love her videos online and they're very inspiring. Marie Forleo is her name. And she actually now has a book, but it came out recently. And even 10 years ago, she just had this catchphrase that is sort of her line to live by, which is everything is figure outable. And I have also found that to be true. So where there's a will, there's a way. Go with your gut. If you trust something, go for it. And the one other piece that's sort of related to that, this came out of like a venture incubator meet and greet, like before Ramona existed as more than a concept, or when Ramona was a concept, but it was like somebody, like a very smart venture person saying, when you're thinking about going to market, go with what's easiest. And I thought that was like the craziest advice, because nothing is supposed to be easy. And it was like, what does she mean by that? But then I thought about it. It's like we all have our networks, right? Like we all have our connection. And for me, it was the wine world or the restaurant world. And so initially I was getting advice from people and it was like, you have to go for Kroger right off the bat. And it was like, wait a minute, that's A, it's not our value system. B, we're not going to make any sense on the shelf next to something that's half the price, but like stands for something very different. But also, like, where do I know people who are going to understand what I stand for? And so the places that were like very easy for me for placements ended up being places where I had relationships, and that ended up being a really good thing. So it was sort of directly opposite to what might have seemed like the right decision, but it was, for my background, what was easiest, and that was the best thing. And I'm sure that means different things to all of us, but like, yes, lean on your network. And if anyone knows you and you believe in what you're doing, then people are going to want to support you.
One of the things that is a model that we live at Invest and Imbibe, which Alexis, Bridget, and Michelle are all a part of, is we always say, come to the table with an offer and an ask. My offer to everyone in this room is, I will always look at your decks and I will always be a soundboard to you. as you are going through the journey of entrepreneurship or transition or fundraising. I am always checking LinkedIn. Hit me up there anytime, or just email me if you want. I'm happy to drop my email in the chat. My ask of each of you is help each other navigate the space. So keep yourselves as open to the dialogue as this conversation just was. It is not easy to talk about the nuances, the struggles, the failures, the successes. I think about what Jordan said, and the thing in my mind is better have a good attorney when you walk down that road. I think about, better go out and figure out your network and make sure that you have a good friends and family circle, unless you just happen to know the right investor and are in the right product at the right time. And I just want to say, like, keep talking. It matters to help each other. So I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists and speakers tonight. As I said, I always learn from you, and I'm humbled to be by your side in these conversations. And a huge thank you to Lynette, and Ivy, who always catch me, and I'm like, I have so much stuff going on, but yeah, let's do it. Thanks for making it happen.
Thank you. And thank you for this really important chat. And we are super inspired. We have one more Finance Friday event this week, dealing with our financial part of SpeedRack. But thank you all for being so open, honest, and we appreciate you all. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. And I think I see emails popping in, but you can always message SpeedRack as well, and we can put you in contact. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.